1 second, guys. Trying to get my video working.
Trying to get my video working. Trying to get my video working. Trying to get my video working.
Hey guys, I do not know why my video's not working, so we're just going to do this by voice. You guys don't really need to see me anyway for me to answer your questions, but it's always good to have you guys here for these live streams. We're learning how to do them as we go, and we're excited to see what great questions you guys have for us today. So there's a few questions that you guys have been asking over the course of since our last Q&A, and I really want to go over some of those real quick, and a lot of it will be focusing on the interaction between players. So what you guys have seen so far in our playthrough live streams have been just the first beginning stages of the game, where we're showing you how to do the actions in the board game. And like any 4X board game, your starting game is really about your initial expansion and development of the economy before you players reach each other and start interacting. And so I want to kind of go over and answer some questions about what happens when players actually do meet in the galaxy and what sort of interactions can they have. So first of all, the first thing I want to cover is what can you do before you meet. One of the big player interaction things in the game are the political cards. And the political cards let you do all the cool specialized stuff from the video game and more by playing these cards either on your own empire or on another player's empire. You get one political card every exopolitics phase, but you have the ability to get more exopolitics cards through researching texts and traditions and other potential ways. So you start out the game with only one per round, but you can eventually get more depending on your choices as you develop your empire. So these political cards, they have two options that you can use them for. You can either use them for a top option that is highly conditional, or a bottom option that's not conditional that always can be used. These highly conditional effects let you play on an empire if they meet certain conditions. So this is how we take into account any special rules for certain things being happy in your empire without you having to memorize them to play the game. For example, what are the ramifications for having unemployed a population? You don't need to know that before you start playing. You don't even know all the possible ramifications for having unemployed population. But if a player plays a political card on you that has a condition that says they must have an unemployed population, it applies this effect. That is how the political cards play into what your empire is. There's also political cards that might say, if you have no unemployed population, you get this beneficial effect. That's an example of something you play on yourself or play on an allied empire. And this is where some negotiation can actually come in, where you can say, I'll play this positive card on you if you do something for me in return. So that is one of the diplomatic elements of the game. Now, you can be playing these political cards on each other before you even meet, because it doesn't necessarily mean that you are doing that to them. It's just the game ramifications for different player states is controlled by the players, rather than you having to remember when the game implements them. The next major way that you will interact with players is through the diplomacy stand. And that diplomacy stand has all the standard diplomatic agreements you can make in the Stellaris video game, such as trade pacts, research agreements, non-aggression pacts, defensive pacts, and we'll be talking about subjugating other empires later on. And you can make these with players at any time. But just like in the video game, they have an influence cost to them. They have an influence upkeep. So you cannot just make diplomatic agreements with everybody, because you will not have the influence to expand your empire at a rate that's competitive. So you kind of have to be picky and choosy who you make these diplomatic agreements with. Just like anything else in Stellaris Infinite Legacy, that's how it starts. You can expand your diplomatic capabilities through acquiring different technology cards and tradition cards. These diplomatic agreements, you clip one of your population clips. If you have a diplomatic, let's say I'm playing yellow, and I have a diplomatic agreement with the red player, a trade pact, a commercial pact. I would take one of his red population clips and place it on my diplomacy stand on the commercial pact spot to show I have a commercial pact with that player. And the nice thing with it being a stand and the player's color clipping on like this is that anybody at the table can see what diplomatic agreements people have with each other. These diplomatic agreements do save between eras, and you can store your diplomacy stands into the box. So that is how the diplomacy generally works in the game. Apparently somebody else told us how to fix it. I'm going to try to fix it right now. 1 second, people. Sorry, still was not able to figure out how to turn on that video. We'll have to figure that out for the next live stream, what went wrong. But I want to go back to talking about the different ways you interact with players. Another way you interact with players is through war. So war is done in a very similar way in Stellaris. You can't just attack somebody and out of blue. You have to first declare war on them. But you can do this at any time you want, as long as you don't have a non-aggression pact with somebody. If you had a non-aggression pact with somebody, you'd have to cancel that first, and you cannot attack somebody you have a non-aggression pact for the round that you cancel that non-aggression pact. So you can't just wait until they do a phase, their expand phase, then declare war on them, and they can't respond. You have to wait until the phase after the round after you end a non-aggression pact to declare war. When you declare war, you choose one of your war goal cards, and your opponent also chooses a war goal card. Starting out, everybody only has the war for territory, which lets you take their systems. You gain more of them as you research your technology and traditions. You'll gain more access to different war goals. War goals we do have a war exhaustion in the game, and that's how you actually win a war. You win a war by getting your enemies exhausting their war exhaustion level. So how much you have to reduce their war exhaustion is dependent on the kind of war goal you choose. So we have several different war goals, and some are easier to win than others. So you have to be very kind of careful about what kind of war goal you choose, because you might choose a very hard war goal. Your opponent chooses a very easy war goal, and they might win because they're able to bring down your exhaustion to the needed level quicker. I'll be demonstrating this in not the next live stream, but the one after that. The next live stream where we play in Tabletop Simulator will be focusing on the different types of cards, like the technology cards, event cards, and political cards. But then in the live stream after that, we will be talking about ship combat, war, invasion, and everything there. But the key thing I'm trying to get across here is that to win a war, you choose a war goal, and you set your war goal dial to whatever your card says, and you have to get that down to 0 to win the war before your opponent gets their dial down to 0. And most often, every war goal can have slightly different ways to reduce the dial, but usually it's by winning space battles, capturing other players' systems, and invading their planets. And that brings me to the next thing, that we actually have you can also invade other people's planets. So we do that with the transport ships. And if you control a enemy system with a planet that they control, you have to send down transport ships to actually capture the planet from them. And again, we'll be going over land combat when we talk about combat in two tabletop simulator streams from now. But you can also bombard planets with your land invasion to help soften up the target as you invade. So a lot of it has the same feel as the video game, where you can bombard planets and you'll use your transport ships in orbit of the planet to send down armies to invade. And we'll go into great detail about that in the tabletop simulator. Let's see. Are there any questions that people have so far in the comments? Yes, in terms of claim systems, D-Click asked about how the war is in exopolitics with the claim systems action. To actually conquer territory, you have to have a claim on that territory. If you move your ships in and you control in the war, you will not gain that system at the end of the war unless you've claimed it. You can claim a system when you're not at war, but you can also claim it during the war if you wish. But you have to actually have a claim on it to actually take it away from another player. That's one of the ways that we kind of you might give a little foreshadowing that your intention is to declare war, because you might have to claim it first, because that's when you have the influence to place claims. Next, let's see, some of the other questions that you had included in the Kickstarter comments. In terms of peace resolution, somebody asked, how does peace resolution work? Peace actually happens when one person wins the war by a war exhaustion dial going to 0, and then they achieve all their war goals automatically. However, you can also make a deal with the person you're at war with, where you guys either call it a wash, a stalemate, or each of you can give certain concessions in order to end the war. That sometimes might happen when there's another threat they both have to deal with, and they no longer want to deal with this war. Because being at war also has an influence cost upkeep. So being at war, you might need that influence for something else. Another question we have here, are star bases just an additional military strength to a system? Yes, star bases do give you a defensive bonus, and as you upgrade them from a token to a miniature and then attaching modules to them, they do get stronger and stronger. Just like in the video game, you can upgrade them to have a larger combat power. And a star base really can't hold its own, but it's a upgraded star base will give the edge to a defending fleet to beat an opponent. One important thing that, again, I'm going into the detail we'll be talking about in that combat tabletop live stream, is that combat is done through one round of combat. It's not a roll back and forth until there's only one player left. You do one round of combat, and whoever was the most effective in that combat forces the opponent to retreat. This keeps combat quicker and not bogging down the overall game, but it also means that combats, you do lose forces at combats, but since they're not to the death, it's much easier to have minor border skirmishes where losing is not necessarily the end of the world. It's more about whether you can hold the territory rather than destroying or losing ships. And we'll be going exactly how combat works in that, like I said, the tabletop simulator. Let's see, another question. Will I put Can you form diplomatic agreements without the intention of respecting them? If you have a diplomatic agreement, the game effects are in effect. So you have the clip there, but you can cancel them in the future. So you can cancel a research agreement, but that is all. We try not to put limits on the diplomacy between players because that is the fun of talking between players. Let them regulate it themselves to determine what is in their own interest and to put pressure on other players. Somebody asked, do you never destroy ships? Oh, you definitely do destroy ships. But you won't, things are not fought to death where one entire fleet has to be wiped out to win the battle. It is whoever in that round of combat does the most damage to the other fleet. And combat round, when I talk about combat round, is that a combat is fought over 4 ranges. You have your long range weapons that fire, all your ships with long range weapons that fire, then ships with medium weapons fire, and then ships with short range weapons, and last, ships that have rapid fire weapons get to fire those weapons again in the final and 4th phase of combat. And after you go through that sequence, then you determine who the winner is, and they have to retreat from the system. And both sides take any losses that they took in the battle. Next question. Are resources trades permanent or is it temporary? If it's temporary, how is it noted down? So there's different, the way that the trade agreements work, like let's say a commercial pact. With a commercial pact, if you have a commercial pact with somebody, before you refresh your resources, you have to spend one of your resources to give another player a copy of that resource. But that resource is recorded in your resource tray as a temporary resource token. So since every resource has its own well, you put that temporary resource in that well to represent that resource. When you spend a temporary resource, it does not go back to you like normal resources at the end of the round. It would be gone permanently. So the commercial pact, you're giving each other temporary resources on resources you have surplus with. So if there's a player whose economy is not doing so well, you're probably not going to have a commercial pact with them because they might not have good resources left over to trade with you at the end of the round before you refresh resources. So it's tracked through these temporary tokens, and that's how you exchange resources. We don't by default have open player trading. You can't just say, I'm giving that player 3 alloys. When we play tested it, we just felt like it bogged down the game with too much negotiation. Instead, we made it a action card that you can research to initiate a one-time trade with somebody by playing the action. So you can still have those exchange of resources, but it's not unlimited where you can just do it any time in the game, and it kind of bogs down things in negotiation. Yes. Now let's see. Next question. Yes, if each ship, if you have 3 ships at long range, you will roll 3 dice. That is the question. Every ship that fires at a range rolls a die. So I think Uwe mentioned that combat is a single die roll. And what he was referring to there is that when a ship rolls an attack, so a ship has a weapon at long range, for example, it rolls 1 die. Its roll both determines whether it hits and how much damage that ship does. So a ship's weapon will list an accuracy, which it has to roll under that number or less. And the number rolled, if it's under the accuracy, is how much damage the weapon does up to that ship's maximum damage. So if a ship has a accuracy of 7 and a max damage of 3, and you roll a 5, you hit, but you do a maximum damage of 3. If you roll a 2, you would just do 2 damage. So we do have a damage range. A powerful weapon, a big powerful weapon that has maybe a max damage of 9, could still end up doing 1 damage if you roll a 1 on its attack. So a big, powerful ship isn't necessarily going to one-hit a weaker ship. And this was one of the balancing things between much later era players and earlier era players, is that a ship that has more powerful weapons has just a higher range than the weaker ships, but they're not guaranteed to do that high damage every roll. Research agreements. Research agreements work by each player in the research agreement gets an extra research resource. So, and you get to draw additional research cards to choose from when you research. So you can both have more resources and you have more research options. So research agreements are great for both parties. But again, it costs an influence to enact that. So you're essentially exchanging an influence for an additional research and additional research option. Next, we have seen if there's any questions that the people in the commentaries cannot answer. One thing I want to cover also in terms of player interaction is how the initiative works between phases. So during the resolution half of a phase, whoever finishes their planning first will be the initiative player for that during the resolution of the phase. And they will decide the order that people resolve what they planned during the planning half. And they will also choose the resolve any disputes of timings that may come up. However, disputes and timing are rare. That's just us having a rule in place that in case with all the different variables that can happen in a game, that there is a rule that makes it clear about who decides a time dispute. They're not a common thing. They don't usually come up in a game, but we just have that rule there as a blanket rule just to keep it simple. Having initiative is not really it doesn't give you a advantage, because even if player 1 resolves their turn first, that does not keep player 2 from enacting their plan, because they both plan at the same time, and no matter what the one player planned, the other player would also get to enact their plan. So there was discussion whether it was going to be an unbalancing factor for people either who were able to finish the plan first because they're faster players or more experienced players. It's really about that we needed a rule that determined what order players take turns in. And that was the simplest way we could think to do it. And there are sometimes very minor advantages that could crop up, but they're not normal universal things. Any questions about specifically, I guess, an initiative that I did not just cover there? Can you lie to other players? I mean, sure, you can tell players that you're going to do something to them, or you can you have a card that you don't actually have. Like you could say, hey, I have this political card that will let me have place pirates in your systems. So you better watch out. And they might reorganize their fleet to combat those pirates, but you really didn't have a pirate card in your hand. So, but if you say you're going to make an agreement with somebody, like let's say, I will play this card on you if you give me a resource. If you make this trade agreement with me, you have to honor that deal. If they make that agreement with you, you have to play that card. You can't be like, let's make the agreement, I'll give you this card. You make the agreement, you say, oh, never mind, we made the non-aggression pact, I'm not going to follow through on what I said. Those kind of transactions are binding. But you can lie that, you know what, if you declare war on me, I'm going to play this piracy card on you. Well, you could not have that piracy card to play on them. So you can lie and bluff in that way. Yeah, in update number 6, the update number 6 of the Nifta says players go in clockwise order after first player opposed to picking the order. So that we tested out so many different ways to do resolution, and one problem that happens in development is that players are not always on the same page. I think that was something that Uva put in there, and that's just a rule that Uva remembered playtesting, but that was not the final way we end up settling on to do it. And that's where sometimes when Uva answers a question, it might be actually a little bit different than the final rules. Uva is not involved in every stage of playtesting. We bring him in every once in a while to get another player's feedback, but that means that he's sometimes out of the loop about everything going on in terms of the final decision on the rules. So that's an example of where that was a little bit of a miscommunication there. But that's why we're doing these Q&As, to give you access to the designer, and so we can clear up any of the questions that might crop up during the campaign for you guys. And it's always a lot of fun to answer all the questions you have, because I'm so excited to get this game out to you, and really have you guys delve in and explore the great world we're building. Next, let's see what the next question is. Somebody asked, are all the possible slots in diplomacy track supported by the game, or some reserved for expansions? There are all the diplomacy things you can do in the base game. If for some reason there was an option that was made available in the expansion, we would include an expanded diplomacy screen with that stand with that expansion. But from my knowledge, it's only when you add in the Federation expansion content that diplomacy, that adds a little bit of expansion on the Federation. I won't go into detail about that. We have plans about how we would implement that, but that doesn't actually affect the diplomacy stand itself. It just kind of expands the functionality of the federations that are in the base game, and would expand the rules there. But the diplomacy stand itself has all the diplomatic agreements you can make in the base game, and there's no stand-ins for future content because it's all in the base game. Somebody asked, is there a max number of planets / systems a player can have? The only limit is the component limit, the number of planets in a system, and the number of star bases that you can maintain. So just like in Stellaris, there's a limit to how many star bases you can have, and that is the limit of how many systems that you control. You can always, again, expand that through your choices through traditions and technology, but that you are limited in terms of how big your empire can grow in that aspect. There's ways for you to, there's just tons of ways though for you to grow that. And that's one of the strategies of the game. It's one of the things that you're trying to build up, increase the amount of territory you can hold. And another limiting factor is how much authority you have. You're always needing to increase your authority, because every system you take control of, every colony you colonize, uses one of your authority resource tokens. So that's the other limit to how many planets you can control. So it's all in terms of game mechanics, but there's no limit to how much you could potentially control. In terms, somebody asked, how does Ascension happen during Endgame? We'll be talking about all that in our another tabletop simulator after combat. How Endgame is, as we'll be talking about what happens towards Endgame compared to beginning game. But essentially, the goal we had needed a way for you to win actually a campaign with this species you designed. So that's where we implemented that they're going to ascend and leave the game in a positive way. You will be gathering Ascension symbols that you put on your player screen. And once you have 6 of those Ascension symbols, you will get a Ascension objective of that matches that symbol type. There are 3 different types of Ascension symbols in the game, so it's 3 different general ways to ascend. And you'll get 2 Ascension objective cards from a variety of them, and you'll choose one that represents how you're choosing to try to ascend your species in some way. And that will have a pretty difficult objective. This is secret from somebody else, but it's not something that's going to be super easy to do. You'll have to work towards it, maybe even re-gear your empire a little bit to achieve it. But then once you ascend, your empire will leave the game in victory, and you will choose a new events based off how you ascended to add to the pool of available events, which represent how your ascended species is still interacting with the galaxy and future empires as a whole. The other cool thing about Ascension is that it unlocks other new game content, such as new ways to customize your empire when you start the game. So as you unlock things in the game, you'll be able to play. New empires will be able to have new options that were not available to you straight out of the box. So that is kind of like a goal of trying to ascend in different ways to unlock different content that you can continue to explore. That is the general idea of the endgame goal. That ties into then within each era, players are competing for communal public objectives, and whoever achieves enough of those objectives would win that era and get an era reward. One of the things that the era rewards always do is give you one of the 3 Ascension path symbols in your screen. So winning eras are one of the ways that you can move towards ascending, but they're not the only one. Could you tell more about damage assignment? Will the defender choose what ships are destroyed during combat, or the attacker? The attacker decides what ships their damage is assigned to. However, one cool thing we implemented in the strategy of the game is you only can damage the enemy ships that are closest to you. So if a player has some ships that fire at long range and some ships that fire at short range, you have to destroy their short range ships before you destroy their long range ships. So your short range ships can actually screen your long range ships, and you can design and organize your fleets accordingly. So we really thought about how we could make not only ship design interesting, but also fleet design. And that also, instead of players having way too many choices about what they could target, by focusing only at the ships that are closest in range, lets us it brings down the number of choices to a way that speeds up gameplay and speeds up battle. And yes, that is the damage assignment. How many crises are there in the game, and does the expansion add more? Will we see gameplay with features from the expansion at any point? So in the base game, there are 3 different crises that you could potentially face. And what crises attacks your galaxy is dependent on how players are trying to ascend. So you add up all the different ascension symbols in the player screen, and whichever is the highest is the type of crisis that will attack your galaxy. So it's a direct response to how you're trying to ascend. We do have plans to unlock more different crises. The 3 crises are in the base game are brand new crises, but we do hope to also unlock the 3 original crises from the video game, or make available those 3 original crises. Yes, so that's the number there are. There's 3. And we want there to be surprises when you guys. It's an experience where there are things that we want you to encounter that are unexpected. We don't want to go into too much detail about what you can expect from the crises, because we really want it to be a surprise as you're experiencing and playing the game. But yes, we're very excited for you to discover what we have in store there. Let's see. Any other good questions? We'll take only a few more before we move on, or before we cut this FAQ. Somebody asked, seems like it's just kind of continuous. You add some cards and possibly other things, so remnant of your race persists, but aside from that, nothing much happens when you ascend. Well, it's a lot like playing any other board game. You play a 4X game, and you play with that game, and then you see who wins, and then it ends. And then the next time you guys bring that game out on the table, and you play a whole new empire that you did not play before to try to explore different strategy. Maybe you're playing with a different group of people, and you play the exact same game over again, but with a starting empire. What Stellaris Infinite Legacy does differently, it's that same thing. You're going to play an empire from beginning to end, see if you can win with that empire, but when you win, then you get to start a new game with a new species, exploring new content. But the difference is what you did with your old empire will affect the game state and be able to impact your new empire and have things and events that your new empire can encounter. So it's just like any other board game. An Infinite Legacy game is a normal board game that you're going to play an empire from beginning to end, and then you're going to start a new empire. But what you did with your own empire will affect the future events and content in the game. And that's what we're excited for you guys to discover. All that, what you do in the game, see how it affects your galaxy in a box. Okay, I'm going to be taking just one more question before we sign out for the day. I have one more question, and I was asked to respond to one specific person's question. Let me see if I can find it in the chat here. What happens with the resources if an action gets impossible? Like, for example, when somebody builds a star base in the very turn I wanted to build one. So that is one of the rare cases where the timing matters. Not only you want to choose your phase so you can build a star base before somebody in the system that you might both be able to build a star base in, but that is where the timing resolution happens. That's one of the rare cases where whoever passes first and can determine the order that things are built, where that initiative matters. But that does happen every once in a while, but it's actually pretty rare because either players are not doing the phase in the same phase, or they don't actually aren't interested in the same systems at the same time. So that is a good example of where your initiative can affect, and there might be a timing conflict of if both players want to build a star base. If you try to build a star base but you're not able to, you will get the resources refunded back that you could use in a later phase or with an action card in a later phase. With that, we'll do one more question. Yes, we are working on the rule book. That's when I'm not doing live streams or writing updates or answering questions for you guys on BGG. I am working on the rules. A lot of that work is taking what we have spread out among different documents where we describe phases in this document, we discuss combat in this document, and bringing them all into one document, and also adding in pictures that helps the terminology make sense. Also, as we go through development, what we call a particular item in the game here might be different than what we call that item over here. The terminology shifts and we explore different terms as we develop. That's one thing I've been working on, is making sure the terminology is consistent through all those different rule sections, and also adding graphics of the items we're talking about. So when I talk about a political card with two options, you actually have a picture in the rules with political card and 2 options that you can refer to understand what the rules are talking about. So that is what I'm working on for day and night until we actually have it done. And I'm hopeful that I can get the first draft to you guys very soon. It will be well before the end of the campaign. I don't want to give a specific date because you never know what happens. But you'll have plenty of time to read over and ask questions. We'll have a whole, probably a few Q&A specifically just answering questions about what you read in the rules and what items you want expanded. Especially since these are not going to be the full complete rules. They're just going to be the rules that give you the initial flow of the game, understand what you need to start playing the game. And yeah, we're excited to get your comments and ideas and see what more information you guys want to know. And after we release the first set, we'll continue to add to and expand to it as we can. So thank you very much, guys. I'm sorry the camera did not work today. Something with the OBS that I installed for using to stream Tabletop Simulator to you guys is messing with my webcam access. We're going to work on figuring that out, and we are actually hopefully going to be bringing on some people to work with us who are experts in live streaming to help make this a smoother process. And we look forward to introducing and giving you some more great answers to in our future FAQs. So thank you guys for your support, and I will talk to you again soon.